Home sellers, welcome back. Today, based on some traffic that we got over the last couple of months, I wanted to give you guys a quick update on what's happening in the real estate world on the home selling front as it relates to the changes that took place August 17th. Now that we're about 2 months into this, just to let you know how things are unfolding in the real estate market. I'm still getting a lot of seller questions about it. And there have been some changes to the way commissions are unfolding in real time and some new developments that we didn't necessarily see coming. And then a lot of just reminders about how this works in the new world. So stick around and we will make sure that you have all the information you need to stay on the cutting edge of the home selling process in 2024. Hi, and welcome to Talking Realty, the go-to podcast for home sellers looking to make more money, save time, and avoid headaches. Whether you're selling a flip, a new build, an income property, or the place you call home, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Glen Whitten, 20-year realtor and founder of the Ohio Property Group. Selling a home can be a complicated and costly process that leaves sellers feeling uncertain and overwhelmed. At the Ohio Property Group, we empower sellers to successfully reach the closing table while keeping more money in their pockets. To learn more, head over to talkingrealty.com and pick up our monthly newsletter or any of our free home seller tools. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Now, let's get to it. So I wasn't really planning on doing this episode, but I've gotten so many questions from sellers recently. I wanted to jump back in and clarify some stuff just so that we have it down. And hopefully it helps a few sellers who are wondering about some of the details. Most sellers have heard something about the lawsuits and the subsequent settlements that came with it. Some sellers have heard about the rule changes, but a lot of sellers, I mean, let's be honest, we live in our own worlds, we do our own thing, and we sell a home in many cases, maybe once every several years, unless you do this professionally. So it's entirely possible that you know very little to nothing, or maybe what you do know is rumor and not entirely accurate. So we're here to set the record straight. So quick recap. Back in 2020, a bunch of home sellers got together, sued a bunch of realtors, and won. They walked away with a $1.8 billion verdict over some shenanigans in the realtor community that they felt were out of bounds. And apparently the judge and jury agreed with them. So enter NAR, the National Association of Realtors, who stepped in on behalf of most of these realtors and devised a settlement with the plaintiffs whereby they would pay a $418 million ticket, which gets shared among the sellers. In addition to the financial settlement, the National Association of Realtors, or NA, decided to make a few changes to the way we do business. Now, mind you, some of these changes were ones that they were persuaded to make by the Department of Justice, who is keeping a very close eye on the realtor community. For a number of years, the Department of Justice has been looking into taking an interest in the realtor community because, let's face it, if you're in the real estate business as an agent like I am, you really don't have a choice but to belong to the one giant 800-pound gorilla association, which is the National Association of Realtors. There are some other upstart associations out there, but frankly, none of them even come close to the power that the National Association of Realtors has, mostly because of the centralized database known as the Multiple Listing Service, which is nationwide, feeds into places like realtor.com and Zillow, so that anywhere you list, you're going to end up on those sites. But also, they have an extremely powerful lobbying arm. Millions and millions of dollars in realtor fees end up going to lobbyists who then fight for change on behalf of realtors and ostensibly for their clients as well. So anyway, when the Department of Justice takes interest in you, it's best if you sit up and pay attention, because ultimately, if you don't give the Department of Justice what it wants in terms of changes, they're going to make it a law, or worst case, they're going to jump in and break up the entire band. So to avoid that, the National Association of Realtors decided it was best to play ball. There were a number of changes, but probably the most visible and impactful change to happen to sellers is that the MLSs, the multiple listing services, in the past, we've always been able to, actually not been able to, we've always been required to list what, if any, amount the seller is offering to the buyer agent community in terms of a commission. So when we would list a property, it's a required field. So the leap was you were required to answer the question. And if you answered with something less than the going rate, which for many, many years has been right around 3%, you were at risk of maybe having your house or your listing shunned by the local buyer agent community because you weren't offering what they considered a competitive rate. And so this has been a struggle for years and years and years with my sellers, because I've been at this since 2000. When we went flat fee in 2003, we immediately had to start having this discussion with our sellers. Is if you want to go into the MLS, we have to disclose what you're offering. What do you want to offer? And we just gave our sellers a choice. And we were one of the only ones, because most traditional agents collect right around 6% and then split that, i.e. 3%, with the buyer agent community. So it was never really a question. It got so pervasive that buyer agents then became, over the decades of this practice, to expect that you would be offering 3% as a seller. Well, when sellers didn't offer 3%, or maybe in the case of a for sale by owner, weren't offering anything, it turns out agents were sort of steering their buyers away from those listings. So from a fiduciary, or that's just a fancy word for saying that your job as a buyer's agent isn't to get the most commission. Your job, your fiduciary duty to your client as a buyer's agent, is to find them the right house that meets all their criteria, that is the best fit for their situation. So anyway, because of these changes, the Department of Justice put in a rule, a strong suggestion, which then turned into a rule that you could no longer list what you were offering the buyer agent community as a seller when you list your property. Okay, well, this is a huge win for home sellers. And we've talked about this before, and I've written articles about this, because it levels the playing field. So we'll get into that in a little bit. So that was one change. The other change that is interesting to us is that the buyer agents have to have a written agreement with a buyer prior to showing them a house or making an offer, which sounds like, well, that doesn't really matter to me as a seller. But the reality is, yes, it does. Because one way or another, that buyer agent's going to want to get paid. And what most agents are doing, at least from what we're seeing, is they're negotiating with their buyer to have the seller pay them. It's one of the options. So that means that effectively buyer agents are still expecting the seller to pay them 3%. And I've seen a bunch of these come through, a bunch of these buyer agent agreements. For some reason, buyer agents like to send them to me when they submit offers, or even sometimes before the showing. They just want me to know, hey, my buyer has agreed that your seller is going to pay me 3%. Well, that's interesting, because the seller gets a vote. You, the seller, you get a vote. And we'll talk about how to exercise that vote here shortly. Okay, so they have to have a written agreement. It must spell out what, if any, amount they're charging for their services. So that could be any dollar amount, could be any percentage. One interesting side note is that whatever they put in that agreement, the buyer agent cannot collect one nickel more. So if they agree to, say, a flat $3,000 or 2% or something like that, that's it. If the seller happens to be offering more than that, then that money just goes away. The buyer agent cannot accept more than what's in that agreement. So it stands to reason that most of them are writing them for that 3% or for a higher amount, because they can come down, but they can't go up. So interesting wrinkle with that item. All right. Another change that came from this lawsuit settlement was that we must make the following statement in all written agreements. So our listing agreement, the buyer agency agreement, even some purchase agreements are now including this. And that disclosure is that all commissions are negotiable, and that no laws, no MLSs, no associations, no entities are setting commissions to a standard amount. Now, I think it's interesting that the Department of Justice wants us to include this, because this is not a change. It has always been like this, but this is an acknowledgement that things have gotten so far off the rails that now not only clients are led to believe that there is a standard commission, but now some realtors believe it. So now we got to tell everybody this just in: commissions are negotiable. Well, commissions have always been negotiable, but it got so bad that the DOJ wanted to make sure we say it over and over and over and put it in writing, and it has to be in bold and all this stuff. Like, they really want it out there that all commissions are negotiable, recognizing that for a long time, People wanted other people to believe that commissions were not negotiable. And even some of those people believed it themselves. All right. So commission transparency in the MLS is now lost. This is what the other side is saying. This is their, oh my gosh, this is a terrible thing. Now nobody knows who's getting paid what. Well, I say, good. But the reason this is coming up now in my podcast is because the number one seller question I'm getting is, do agents know that I'm offering a commission? Or where do I put in that I'm offering a commission? Or, hey, I'm offering X%. I want agents to know that. And I answer them all the same way, is that, well, there is nowhere to put that in the MLS because that's been outlawed. You can't do that anymore. Oh, well, how do I let agents know? Well, believe me, those agents will ask. So if you're a home seller, 2024, after all these changes have taken effect, keep in mind, it is a rare day when a buyer agent is going to want to show your house or even write an offer without knowing whether or not you're willing to entertain a commission discussion. You can post it on social media. That's up to you. You can put that out there. I'm not a fan. If I was going to put anything on social media, I would probably say something like agents welcome or we will pay a commission, and then leave it at that, because pre-negotiating that is not a good idea. Letting them know you will negotiate it is a great idea because it casts a much, much wider net. We have a lot of listings, so we get this question a lot. Typically, it's a short text message. Hey, what is the seller at so-and-so offering a commission? We answer them all the same way. And that is, yes, the sellers are open to offers that have commissions. Basically, you want to let that agent know, absolutely, and we'll talk about it during the offer. That's the only message you're trying to get across. If they press you, and I covered this in depth in another episode, if they press you on how much they're offering, the answer is as follows. You should write this down, carve it in stone, put it in a text shortcut, and use it over and over and over. Is the commission will depend on the offer terms and any competing offers. I have a longer version in a previous episode, but something like this lets them know two things. One, the quality of their commission will be in direct relation to the quality of their offer. And two, they may be competing with other offers that are just as good as theirs, but have a lower commission. That's the implied message. It puts everybody on notice that you'll talk about it when it's appropriate. And oh, by the way, you're not operating in a vacuum. So keep in mind, sellers, that when buyer agents ask these questions, which naturally they're bound to do before the showing, that you need to stay open and vague. So we'll dig into that a little bit more here in a bit. So in case you missed it, the reason we could no longer publish commissions in the MLS was because agents were in fact filtering out. We found out they were running searches. They were setting up automatic searches to filter out any properties that weren't offering a 3% commission. So you as a buyer contact your agent. Hey, I'm looking in these zip codes, this price range. These are the features I want. Then we can go in as an agent and set up a profile with automatic alerts. This is not news. Well, some agents were adding an extra field to that search that said, hey, if it's below 3%, don't send it. Don't even show it to them. Now, that's just a fool's errand because you can't hide a property in 2024. When this came to light, of course, the DOJ stepped in and said that's one of the reasons why we're eliminating it from the MLS. We don't want it to even be possible for agents to filter out, because if agents don't know what's being offered or not offered, it's a lot harder for them to steer buyers away or to certain listings. The other thing that was happening is when maybe a buyer would bring up a property and say, hey, I really like 123 Main Street. It looks like a good fit for us. Can you show it to us? Agent goes into the MLS, finds out in the old days that they were offering maybe not such a great commission. So rather than negotiating their commission with their buyer or during the offer, which is what they should have done, some agents were making up or emphasizing features of the home that might make the buyer less interested. In other words, they were letting their own bias toward the commission influence how they presented the property. This is a huge ethical violation, but now that is no longer possible. So not having the MLS displaying your commission does one major thing for you. As a home seller, this makes it so that fewer and fewer agents can and will skip your property. And we know, statistically speaking, you're going to get more showings because the MLS is not displaying commission amounts. They can't be compared anymore. If you tell agents that, yes, you're open to negotiating those during the offer, and they press you and you tell them, yes, it depends on the quality of your offer, you're likely to get more and more showings because agent knows they've got a shot at getting a decent commission. And we know from experience, truth number 6, more showings equals more offers equals more money, because the more buyers that want your property, the more valuable it becomes. This episode of Talking Realty is brought to you by our friends at Associates Title. This team is shaking things up by focusing on what truly matters, putting the customer first. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, for sale by owner, or working with a realtor, they've got your back with incredible cost savings and the latest technology to streamline the process. Their secure online portal keeps everyone in the loop, from buyers and sellers to lenders and agents, all while keeping your data safe and communication crystal clear. If you're getting ready to make a move, do not underestimate the importance of having a great title company in your corner. Check them out today at associatestitleinc.com, or call my friend Ryan Phillips at 614-419-2418. Check the show notes for those links. Don't leave your title company choice to chance. Now, back to the show. So my advice to you is to stay open. Stay open to commissions as part of the offer, especially if it's a great offer. I do have a few sellers that will tell me, Glenn, I'm not paying a commission. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. I'm not paying a commission. My answer is always the same. You would if I made you the right offer. No, I don't think so. Okay, so you're asking $300,000. I come to you with a holy grail offer for the uninitiated. The holy grail offer is cash, no inspections, basically nothing between here and closing except a signature. That's a holy grail offer. If I come to you with a holy grail offer and it's $20,000 over what you're asking, but I want a $9,000 commission, would you do it? Of course you would, right? Because you're $11,000 ahead. So that's how we shut that question down, which says to me that for the right deal, any seller will pay a commission. So why not just start out that way? Yes, absolutely. Of course, we'll discuss it during the offer. Oh, how much do you want? Well, it depends on the offer and what other offers we have. So let's just get to that point. See if they even like the house first. Then we'll talk about your commission during the offer. Okay, now that we're 60 days in, I wanted to share some of the changes that we've seen. And this is very exciting news. We track a lot of things here. And one of the things we track is the average commission that's paid on a deal. And I can tell you over the last several years, that number is down to right around 2.6% for us. Now, we do hundreds of deals a year and we cover the whole state of Ohio. So this is kind of a good average for the whole state of Ohio for the last few years. Sellers are paying right around 2.6% of the sales price in a buyer agent commission. Since the settlement, over the last 8 to 10 weeks, that number is down to under 2% in just 60 days. We've seen a massive drop in commissions. You're talking about a 30%, I don't know if I did that right, 20 to 30% drop in buyer agent commissions. That is a huge win for sellers. So this is working. What we're doing, what we're advocating, coupled with the rule changes, is working. It's putting hard-earned money back in my sellers' pockets where it belongs. Almost no sellers, I can count on one hand the number of sellers we've seen in the last 60 days that have paid 3%. And that is a high number of closings, and almost no one is paying 3% anymore. So very nice to see that move. But keep in mind, based on information we're gathering, traditional agents, almost all of them, are still playing the same game. So even though they can't put the commission in the MLS, traditional listing agents are still going to hit you, the seller, up for 6%. So that part of it hasn't changed. But when we really negotiate these deals during the offer, it's resulting in real savings. Just understand there's still a ton, the vast majority of traditional players out there who, if you list with them, they're going to try to get you at the old rate, because for them, nothing has changed. And for them, the options that they're giving you is to either deal with their program or go list with someone else, because they believe that the majority of their competitors are doing the same thing. We are not. We never have. And I'm sure there are some competitors out there who are doing the same thing, but I think there are more and more who are not. because some of them are waking up and realizing this party is ending very, very quickly. Another significant change since the lawsuit took effect, since the changes took effect 60 days ago, is that buyers are, for the first time, much more aware of the fact that they have a say in how much their agent gets paid. See, in the past, when traditional agent was collecting 6% and sharing some of that with the buyer agent community, there was no discussion. Agents would take a buyer and say, oh, don't worry, I'm going to show you properties and you don't have to pay me. Seller's going to pay me, or they wouldn't even have the discussion at all about who's going to pay them. Some even said their services were free, which, interestingly enough, the DOJ, Department of Justice, 3 years ago outlawed that practice. The fact that they had to stop agents from saying they work for free is just insane to me, but that's what happened. So now, instead of buyer agents saying I work for free or the seller's going to pay me, they now have to have this discussion as part of the law change. They have to have this discussion. And furthermore, House Bill 466 in Ohio is a new law that just went into effect stating that buyer agents now must have a written agreement. So you could violate the MLS rules now that they've changed and not really be at too much risk. But if you violate Ohio law, now you're facing real problems, because they can take your license and they can do other things to you too. So that's what happens when you break the law. So these things have all come into play, and it's gotten a lot of press. So buyers are much more aware of the fact that they have a say in how their agent gets paid. And that has sort of translated into more downward pressure on buyer agent commissions, because buyer agents have to show value. I can't just say I work for free or don't worry about how I get paid or how much I get paid, because we already know that 3% that was going to the buyer agent was being baked into the price of the home. Well, now it's subject to negotiation. Now that the buyers are more and more aware of this, now that they have to have this conversation with agents before even looking at a house, it's putting a spotlight on these buyer agent commissions, which some of them are frankly outrageous. We'll talk about that in a second, but we're seeing now that those rates are not just coming down because sellers are less willing to pay it, but now buyers are getting in on the act and saying, no, I'm not going to pay you $30,000 to show me a house and write a deal. Like, that's ridiculous. But they didn't think twice about it before because someone else was paying it or they thought it was free. So this is all converging. And the results are people are paying lower and lower commissions all the time, which is long overdue, in my humble opinion. We're even seeing offers come in with no mention of commission. The reason that happens is some very savvy buyers want this out of the way. Very savvy buyers. They are going to have a discussion, tell the agent, listen, this is what I want you to do, and here's how much I'm going to pay you. That's my world. That's flat fee world. So if you as a seller are negotiating an offer and there is no mention of commission, first of all, you should look very, very hard. RTFC, read the freaking contract. Make sure you find whether or not it's addressed in the contract, because it's probably in there 9 times out of 10. The commission is addressed somewhere in the contract. If you can't find it, feel free to ask the buyer's agent, or don't. If you can't find it and you didn't sign off on it, then it's not your problem. But if you missed it and you signed off on it, it is now your problem. So keep that in mind. But a number of buyers are starting to come forward, and these offers are showing up with zero commission mention, which means the buyer is paying it outside of closing. Perfectly legal. We're also starting to see more and more flat fee. Not a lot, it's just a small number right now, but it's happening. And we never saw this before, but we're starting to see some buyer agents who are taking a flat fee for their services, which, hallelujah, this is fantastic. As I've said for years, it doesn't cost any more to sell $1 million home than it does a $100,000 home. So why would I charge 10 times more? I wouldn't. I don't. But the rest of the realtor community, mostly they do. And buyers are starting to see this now and say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Like, if I buy $1 million home versus a $100,000 home, I would pay $3,000 for the $100,000 home for a 3% commission, but I would pay $30,000 for the $1 million home. Like, what am I going to get? Extra foot massages, maybe some lattes thrown in? Like, what are you going to do my gardening for life? What in the world are you going to do to justify the other $27,000? Well, these are questions a few sellers were asking. Well, now that this has all happened, things are unfolding. Buyers are starting to, more and more and more people are starting to question the legitimacy of a sliding scale commission. It doesn't make any sense. It never has, and it never will. So thank goodness, getting more and more press on that one. So the great news for sellers is that now that this is no longer the MLS, the commission that is, and now that buyers are getting in on the act of negotiating, is you're no longer a pariah for saying, no, I'm not paying you 3%. No, I want to see the deal come together. I want to see the deal first before we talk about your commission. This has effectively leveled the playing field for sellers. So if you didn't want to go along to get along, paying 6%, paying 3%, whatever to the buyer agents, in the past, you ran the risk of getting fewer showings, of cutting yourself off from certain buyers because their agents were steering them away from you. That is no longer the case. And now that the negotiations are right where they should be in the deal, we're now seeing fairer and fairer negotiations and lower commissions. So all in all, these are huge wins for everybody, not just sellers, but for buyers as well. As most of you know, we don't run paid ads for this podcast or for the Ohio Property Group. We rely on word of mouth. So if you find any of this content useful or maybe even a little bit of fun, would you mind taking a few seconds to give it a rating? And if you're feeling really generous, maybe take a few extra seconds and write us a review. I would consider it a personal favor. So let's spread the word and get other home sellers on board. Okay, now back to your regularly scheduled broadcast. One of the other things we're noticing is that buyer agents are now starting to be a little more flexible. I don't think it's just a matter of they know that they have to do something or they're going to starve. That certainly is true. However, when they sit down with the buyer to sign this agreement that is now required, not just by the MLS, but by the state, they have to put a number down. And in that document, they have to explain what it is they're going to do for that number. Well, most buyers could do the math pretty fast and say to themselves, what? What are you going to, you're going to get paid what? For doing what? Okay, I'm not sure about this. So these buyer agents, is dawning on them that they, for the first time, many of them have to not only have the discussion, but they have to be convincing. They have to convince a buyer that they are worth what they're charging. Oh, some do believe that, and some do provide a high level of service. I'm not sure it would justify some of the fees, but that's not my deal. I do think, however, well, I don't think, I know some buyer agents are coming down on the commissions they're requiring because they understand it makes no sense. So if they want to stay alive and they can't sell that 3%, then they're going to have to sell something they can sell, which is maybe a flat fee or a lower amount. But one way or another, they've got to get it ironed out before that buyer goes into the house with them. And some buyers are going to look at that 3% and look at that agent and say, I don't think so. I'll either go unrepresented or I'll find somebody else. Hats off. Some of the maybe intended, but certainly unexpected changes that have come as a result of these settlements and rule changes is that we're now seeing more and more sellers able to sell through the MLS, because in the past, right around 16% of home sellers have chosen to sell for sale by owner versus using a realtor. And many of them did that because they literally could not afford to pay 6%. They didn't have that much equity. Maybe they were even upside down. They had no way to pay the agent. Well, now that the expectation is no longer there to offer a huge buyer agent commission, they can contract with somebody like me for a few $100s to put them out there, get the massive exposure that you get on realtor.com and through the MLS without the massive fee that goes with it. So it's opening not only more doors for some sellers to come to the table, but now those homes, which may be great values, are now in front of buyers, whereas before they were hidden away on FSBO sites, for sale by owner sites, or maybe just with a sign, and maybe an out of town or out of state buyer never even knew the property existed. Therefore, we know more and more sellers and buyers are getting access to more inventory, which is something this market desperately needs. We also know that some sellers were just flat out discriminated against. So even though you could offer less, as I've talked about ad nauseum, some agents chose to push buyers away. That hurt both buyers and sellers, and frankly, that agent, because everything comes back to you. Check out my karma episode. It all comes back around. But now that buyers and sellers enjoy greater flexibility without the threat of steering from agents who only wanted to show listings with an acceptable amount offered, we see more and more wins for buyers and sellers in this inventory starved market. Another side benefit that's come out of this is that buyers are now much more educated, at least they should be, after this conversation about what are you, the agent, going to do for me and how much am I going to pay you? They've got some real skin in the game now. Some of them are paying it out of pocket, sure, but most of them are still rolling it into the price of the home. But at least they're aware that they can negotiate it, and they've got to be aware on a conscious or subconscious level that if they bring their buyer agent commission down, ultimately it's going to translate into a lower price. That's going to benefit that buyer and the seller because the seller is going to keep more of that lower price. It also means that the buyer gets to make an informed choice about what they're going to pay and who is going to be their agent before they get too far into the process. Because in the past, when this conversation was not happening, buyers, let's just paint this scenario because it happens a lot. Buyers would get involved with an agent. They would have no discussion of who paid them, how much, and when. Then the buyer would stumble across a property that was for sale by owner, offering zero commission, but it's the perfect house for that buyer. In the past, the agent had a choice. The agent could do the right thing, which is negotiate a fee with that seller or with their buyer and then show it anyway. But that's not what usually happened. Either the agent would try to talk the buyer out of that for sale by owner, like don't look at it for X, Y, and Z reasons, or the buyer would just dump the agent and then go mano a mano with the for sale by owner, which was fine. But, you know, it's a frustrating and uncomfortable situation for the buyer. And there has to have been cases, I know of cases where the buyer didn't get that house because of the stupid commission conversation, which should have happened before, that didn't happen when it could have happened. And all of a sudden that opportunity for the seller and the buyer are lost, and the agent, because the agent could have made money, could have worked out a fee that would have been equitable for everybody involved. And as my dad used to say, if it's not a good deal for everybody, it's not a good deal. But these agents many times were too embarrassed, or they were just flat out uncomfortable they didn't know how to have that conversation with the buyer or the seller, so they didn't do it. I know that it took me some training when I was a buyer's agent, but we had these conversations at the outset, which is where they belong, which is probably why I practice the way I practice, because I was taught that way from the very beginning. Another reality since this has happened is that since some sellers are a lot less willing to pay a buyer agent commission, some buyers may be in a pickle because they may not have the cash to pay their agent whatever it is they need to pay them to make this work. So in that case, I would continue to emphasize that sellers should be very flexible about the terms of the offer. You don't care about the top line. You don't care about all the stuff that's between the top line and your bottom line. The bottom line, that's what you care about. That's where you need to hang out. So some buyers, if they struggle to come up with the cash and you as a seller will not let them roll it into the deal, you're going to lose that buyer. That could be a very good buyer. Don't refuse to stay open to negotiating a commission or buyer closing costs that will naturally happen during the offer. So when you get the question ahead of time, I know I'm beating this into the ground, but it's important for you to understand. You need to stay open and be willing to negotiate these things at the time of the offer, because at the end of the day, you don't have to take an offer that you don't like. So be open to creative options that make a deal work. We talk about these options all the time. And if you're in Ohio, you might want to get a hold of us, because if you've got a deal that you can't seem to get together, I probably have a way to make that work for you. You know, check out other videos, check out my blog, read the book, whatever. But somewhere in there, I promise you, is a path through. If the buyer and seller really were on the same page and wanted it to come together, we can usually find a way to make that happen. But when you work with a buyer and you work with their agent around the commission, now, instead of it being this expected thing like the old days, now you're actually creating goodwill by being willing to work with the buyer, be willing to acknowledge that their agent should get paid, and figuring out how to make it all work for everybody. So if you get hung up on the window dressing, you're going to get emotional. If you get hung up on, well, they're offering me this, but the buyer agent gets this, and now the buyer needs me to pay this, you're going to get emotional. And we already know, truth number 3, emotions are expensive. Don't fall into that trap. Keep your eye on the bottom line, the net number. We offer this for free on our website. You can go in, plug in the numbers, and we'll tell you how much you'll walk away with. You can find that. I'll link to it in the show notes, but you can do as many of these as you want so that you have an idea of what you're going to walk away with if you're representing yourself. Just keep in mind, you care about the bottom line, the net number. That's where it's at. If you get all wound up during negotiations and make the buyer the enemy, I promise you it's going to show up somewhere down the road. Sometime when you really need some love in that love tank, if you've blown it all, getting hung up on this stuff during the negotiations, you won't have enough left and you will not make it to closing. One of my favorite things to do during negotiations is, let's say you get together with the price, but the agent's commission or some of the concessions for the buyer closing costs are standing in the way. You want this price up here. They want you to be slightly lower down here. And it's got all this other hair on it, the buyer agent commission or whatever other expenses are thrown in there. If you can trim those expenses, you can meet their price. So get your bottom line, get them the price they want. All you got to do is cut out some of that stuff in the middle. So at that point, we go back to the agent and we say, great news. We've decided to accept your buyer's price. But in order to make the deal work, we had to make a few adjustments. And then what I do is put them right into a counteroffer. So I'll say the price is great, which is all the buyer wants to see. But commission's got to be here, or this has to be here, whatever you need to move around to get your net number. Again, book a call with me or check out our website. We can help you with this. But that little move has worked for us countless times because you kept your eye on the bottom line. I think this is probably self-evident, but just in case you're wondering, if you're out there for sale by owner and you agree to pay a buyer agent commission, I just got this question, that's why I'm covering it. You are still unrepresented. That buyer agent is still working for the buyer. Even though you're paying them, they're still working for the buyer. So keep that in mind. They don't work for you. Don't tell them anything that you don't want to be held against you. Okay. Keep your facts close to the vest. So in conclusion, all commissions are negotiable before, during, and after the deal is made. No matter what you hear, nobody sets commissions at a standard amount. There is no standard commission. Okay? No matter what you hear, you heard it right here. There is no standard commission. And just because a buyer agreed to pay a commission to their buyer agent doesn't obligate you, the seller, to paying that amount. That amount is completely negotiable during the offer. So the upshot is that these changes have brought very good results for sellers. Commissions are down, negotiations are happening when they should, deals are still closing at a very high rate. So this has not disrupted the market the way everybody predicted, the doomsayers predicted that it would. So stay open-minded, stay focused on your bottom line, and there are a lot of new strategic benefits to this rule change, this new world that we're living in post-settlement. So check out my website. We have an NAR lawsuit page dedicated to all content related to this. You should get yourself signed up to get notifications when new content comes out for that if you're interested in this topic. Otherwise, I will let you get back to your day. Thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you learned a little something or maybe had a little fun. If so, please share this episode with someone either privately or on the socials. Feel free to tag me if you do. The Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by Associates Title and the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned brokerage serving all 88 Ohio counties with realtor services. By the way, if you have questions or topics or guests you'd like us to cover in the future, I want to hear from you. Just head over to talkingrealty.com or check the show notes for my contact information and say hello. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. For the Ohio Property Group, this is Glen Whitten signing off. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.